So, does anyone care to touch on this further?
So we hired 2 confidential assistants to the director of the Peace Corps, of all things. Because a confidential assistant is somebody that's got that dedication, that drive, normally they've got that commitment, that excitement, and they're having to make a lot of personal sacrifices, because particularly in that particular case, they're all over the world traveling, and that's the person that's right by the side of the director, who's helping with everything from logistics to policy and everything else. That's a really good training ground, and it's also one where there's a premium on willing to sacrifice and having the kind of personality that would keep things in confidence and so forth. That's a really good training ground, and then you can go from there. You've shown that you're loyal and that you work hard and that you think on your feet.
My name is Jerry. I left MAGA and I'm working my way through the Project 2025 training videos. We are up to number 10 of 25, or I'm sorry, of 24, number 10 of 24. And this particular video is about appointees and policymaking. I want to start out taking a look over here at the Project 2025 tracker. We're still sitting at 53%, so it's been there for a few days. I'm happy about that. Yeah, I've been watching it tick up since it was at 42%. 1,009 days and plus a little bit until it's all, till this term ends. Links are in the description, including for Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025. The link for that PDF is in the description. So, appointees and policy making. Let's just go ahead and jump into this and go ahead and give them a like. And of course, I leave the title cards in place because ProPublica deserves the credit for the work that they've done. And unfortunately, no, the Heritage Foundation did not respond. We'll see what the vocal pace is like. I may end up bumping.
You don't have that honeymoon period for very long, maybe 100 days, and you have to execute and prove that you deserve to win that election by fulfilling the promises to the American people.
All right, yeah, I'm going to skip the intro and we're going to go ahead and speed this up too. I want to go ahead and get through this. Let's get through this intro. And there we are. Your service matters.
Welcome to our Project 2025 Transition Project and our training session today. Why your service matters, how presidential appointees at all levels can impact policy. I'm Derek Morgan, Executive Vice President at the Heritage Foundation, and I'm joined today by Roger Severino, Vice President for Domestic Policy, and Aaron Walsh, who's our Senior Fellow in International Affairs at the Asian Studies Center. We're going to be talking today about why it's important to be aligned in an administration, why you should serve, and the impact that you can have. And so with that, I think we'll get started right away with introductions and where we served in administrations. All 3 of us served different presidents, some of us multiple presidents. We'll get to that. I served for 4 years for Vice President Dick Cheney as his staff secretary and special counsel and assistant to the vice president. It was an excellent experience, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little later. But Roger, why don't we start with you, and where did you serve?
I was in the Trump administration as director of the Office for Civil Rights at Health and Human Services, HHS. And before that, I was a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice as a career. So I was able to see both sides, on the political and the career side.
Excellent. And Aaron, tell us, where did you serve?
Well, I started at the age of 18, so I served 4 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. When I was in college, I was at the Office of Correspondence, and then went on to Political Affairs, then went over to the Office of Protocol and served at Blair House, Department of Energy, and then in the Bush 41, I served up the U.S. mission to the UN for 5 years. And then in 43, I came back and was at the State Department in Near Eastern Affairs Bureau. And then during the Trump administration, I was at the White House, and then over to as Assistant Secretary at Department of Commerce, and then came back to the White House at the National Security Council.
That's fantastic.
So how does she not fit into the category of a career politician, a career appointee? I'm having trouble balancing that because they don't want career people in here working. But then again, I guess career on the same agenda, same team is different.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to be the beneficiaries of all of our experiences here as we talk about it. I want to start with, Roger, I'll start with you on motivation. What was it that encouraged you to make that step, to kind of put your hat in the ring to try to serve the President of the United States?
Well, the opportunity to impact policy at all.
Oh, to serve the president of the United States, not to serve the country. Okay.
To try to serve the President of the United States?
Well, the opportunity to impact policy at a wholesale level. When I was an attorney at DOJ, it was representing the United States, which is an amazing privilege, but for individual cases. And I moved from individual cases to large-scale national policy, and having that impact at such a broad scale, where you could see your ideas impact so many people for good, was an opportunity I just could not pass up. And it turned out to be more impactful even than I imagined. Because one of the things I realized is that it's so few people in positions of authority that are making these important decisions. And I really wanted to be a part of that.
Fantastic. And Aaron, what is it that drew you? I'm sure part of it was President Ronald Reagan himself, who was such an influence on so many of us. In addition,
Yeah, Reagan. Yeah, I was part of Reagan's Air Force. I know I keep saying that, but yeah, Reagan influenced a lot of us.
to that, what made you think, well, I should go work for the president?
So I had an opportunity to go and do that when I was in school, and then I'd heard the second inaugural address that the president did. I was just bundled up with a few friends, and we went down to the mall and stood there and listened to the speech, and it was so inspiring. And so I got involved, just volunteer work, and then got a real job in the Library and Research Center. And it just, being part of that administration was just incredible. And, you know, I mentioned to you earlier, just getting coffee or Xeroxing or doing anything you needed to do to be part of a team, because there's one leader, one principal, and that's the President of the United States, and everybody else is a support. And just to be part of that administration, and all the administrations, as a matter of fact, has been incredible.
Yeah.
So she's fine fetching copy and doing photocopies. She's fine being that front office girl, just to be part of the machine. Inclusion. But I thought inclusion was bad. Oh, wait a minute. We're talking tribalistic inclusion. I'm sorry. Anyway, let's get back to this.
That's great. So there's a mix of really a lot of admiration for the person who's running, and certainly support of their policy agenda that all kind of comes into to the motivation. Roger, you mentioned impact, and I want to drill down just a little bit on that. What kind of impact were you able to have, or should people expect to be able to have, maybe at multiple different levels?
In my particular role, I was a regulator and enforcer of our civil rights laws, conscience and religious freedom laws, and health and privacy laws as well. That is unique. Not everybody has that role. However, most federal agencies do have a regulatory function. They issue regulations, and in many ways, unfortunately, that's how we are governed nowadays. Not so much through our laws, but through our regulations. And there's tremendous power if you work in a federal agency and you work in a regulatory role. There are other folks who work in an enforcement role, enforcing laws, and there's others who work in actual distribution of federal benefits or federal programs or research and things like that. So there's all sorts of places for people to contribute. But I do think people should be quite aware of the impact of our regulations on daily life.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah, like deregulating glyphosate.
important. And Aaron, so you started off very, very young, and you were talking about being willing to help in any way that you can. How does your expectation of the impact you're going to be able to have, how does that change with time and with experience?
Sure. So my last role was at the National Security Council, and that's a very different role than obviously you start out with. And I came in and out of government, obviously, and I think the National Security Council is very much of a policy process. So it's different than being part of the agencies. It's really more, if you didn't have a National Security Council running this type of process, so the policies are made, I mean, the president drives the policy, but there's a whole system and process that's in place in order to follow that. And I think that is something that level of discipline that people have to have is very important. And because what is presented by the National Security Council to the president is where he has his options and can make a decision. And so that's quite critical.
It is. And, you know, I think back on my own service, and you're never quite sure what your impact is, but on a day-to-day basis, one of the jobs I had was staff secretary. And so I had the job for Vice President Cheney that he actually did for President Ford. And I knew that within my scope of control was making sure that all the briefings that he got were completely factually correct and had all of the relevant information, perhaps multiple points of view fairly presented. And you know, you had the satisfaction of knowing that you've given the principal the very best information.
Could I add
Jump in,
two
please.
stories of impact?
Just to remind you, the principle is that individual that you're working as an advisor for or an appointee for, the career, as they call them.
The principal the very best information.
Could I add
Jump in,
two
please.
stories of impact? During COVID, so much of the federal government was, in the beginning, in almost a mode of panic. And being there during that moment, those who kept a level head made a tremendous difference. There were a couple instances where civil rights laws were being threatened, particularly with the question of rationing of medical care. There was the idea that we're going to run out of ventilators. What are we going to do? Who's going to be choose to live or to die? Those questions. And again, it was a very scary time in our history. Some states had triage policies that would put people with disabilities, particularly Down syndrome, at the back of the line and make them flatly ineligible. And the civil rights office that I led at the time became active on the issue, and through our enforcement powers convinced states.
I don't think that happened. I don't think that medical care was prioritized that way. That somebody with Down syndrome would be considered less of a priority than somebody who's otherwise generally healthy. I don't think that was happening.
To drop those discriminatory policies. So that had real world impact at a very scary time. And another example was same thing during COVID. After the lockdowns, people were not going back to hospitals. Beds were trying to be reserved for the most sick, and people were not receiving medical care. There was a question as to whether they could use their iPhones or use Skype, etc., to get telehealth, because those devices were not HIPAA compliant. My office was the HIPAA regulator. Well, we issued guidance saying that we would not be enforcing it in that manner, and I believe we actually saved lives and helped transform telemedicine, because so many thousands of people were talking to their doctors when they otherwise were afraid to go to the medical centers and hospitals. And I'm sure we probably found people who were showing their doctors with their iPhone, hey, what is this mole? And turns out it may have been cancer. It goes to show you'll never know where your public service may take you, but you could even have life-saving impact.
I'm not thinking that played out like that either. I remember pretty much everybody was like turning to Zoom, and there was all sorts of video platforms that were popping up for group talk, and various organizations were setting up their own telehealth systems. Like the VA set up their own. Other medical networks set up their own. I don't know that. I'm pretty sure I can't trust this guy's word.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I was thinking about this in my own experience, which is particularly as a more junior level person, or when you start out, you have to do your work really excellently. And then before you know it, someone turns to you and asks for your opinion on something. And that's when you can have an impact. And so it just, as in life, we should make sure that we're doing the very best job we can. And sometimes they'll turn to you and say, well, what do you think, Roger? Or what do you think, Aaron?
So you worked for Vice President Cheney. Did the Vice President ever turn to you?
He did, yes. And he also taught me, he used to say this a lot. He'd say, I got this job because I didn't talk about the last job. So I probably shouldn't share everything, but I will share that.
I got this job because I didn't talk about the last job. That sounds like lying by omission to me. I I don't know. I don't know. Is that a thing? Lying by omission? I think it is.
There was a process for Presidential Medal of Freedom winners, and I got the first draft of the memo of everybody that I thought should win the award, and he ended up taking some of those suggestions straight to the president. So, you never know. When someone turns to you ask for your advice, they might actually listen too. Aaron, I'd love to turn to you and ask you that same question.
On the impact, I was just going to say, the religious freedom thing. It came to us. The president's going to speak at, every year at the UN, and so there was a lot of focus on religious freedom, and I thought it'd be wonderful if the president could speak at the UN. No president has ever done that on religious freedom. And at the same time, from both the domestic side and the international side, we were looking at this issue, and we all came together, and domestic policy and the NSC, and really drove a religious freedom. The president signed an EO, and then went up and had heads of state. First time ever that a president has spoken on that issue, so it was really quite something very exciting.
That's fantastic. And so much of what the president does is leadership, and that's a huge step in leadership. Let me ask you both, because we probably have a lot of young people listening here, and they're wondering, you both were senior folks in the administration, what kind of people were you looking to hire? What were the top 2 or 3 things that you wanted to make sure were on target? Aaron, I'll start with you.
Sure, great. One of the things we were looking at is people that had experience to go into the different roles that they had in each of the department. I mean, every single department that we have has multiple layers of roles, everything from strategic communications to advanced to, in the national security side, a whole number of things on domestic policy side, the same thing. So we're looking for people that have had academic or real world experience in those areas, and then we look for someone that is supportive of the president's policies. They really have to be totally in line with the conservative policies that the president.
There you go. There you go. They have to be totally in line with the conservative policies.
President has uh, enunciated through the campaign and then obviously through the administration. So that's the most important issue. And drive, interest in supporting and being a team player.
And you really got to have all three of those to
Absolutely.
be effective. Roger, anything you'd add to that in terms of folks that are listening to this? Like, how can I make myself more appealing to a mid or senior level person?
You have to be willing to be flexible and willing to sacrifice. A lot of people who come to these positions when they're young, they're full of energy, full of ideas, and they have to combine that with a work ethic that's willing to take what comes, because these jobs are very fast-paced, they're very intense, but they are so incredibly rewarding. They're an adventure. When I would be interviewing folks to work under me, I'd get the typical questions. What's a day going to be like in
He makes it sound like military service. It's an adventure.
this role? And I would do my best to explain it, and then I would tell them, but a month from now, it's going to be radically different.
Yeah.
Because things are changing so fast, and people have to be comfortable with that. But I did tell them this. I said, I can't tell you what's going to happen
Well, it's only moving that fast, and things are getting broken because, Steve Bannon and flood the zone and all that stuff.
in 2 months from now, but I could guarantee you, you'll be telling your grandkids what you have done after you've served in the administration.
Yeah, I'm not thinking at this point that's going to be a deal. In fact, I'd be willing to wager that shoot fire with it, probably, possibly as soon as 5 years. It'll be hard to find anybody that will admit that they voted for Trump. I'm thinking, of course, there will be some people that will hold those stories close. I mean, there were former Nazis that were not afraid to talk about their stories with the right people.
Yeah, so well said. And Aaron, since you got such an early start in your career, what are the kind of positions that somebody, even in college still, or
Right.
maybe just recently graduated, it's their first job, what kind of
By the way, let me clarify, former Nazi. I'm talking post World War II, fled Germany Nazis. Okay.
positions are there available in the administration at large for that type of person?
There are so many. I mean, I think timing is everything in terms of your ability to come into an administration. And even if you're still in college, you can find ways of trying to volunteer if you can in different.
Timing is everything. That's what I heard QAnon talking about constantly, about lining up the prosecution of the Clintons and all the creeps on the Epstein files.
Different areas in different departments. Sometimes they take volunteers. They certainly had at the White House. And I think once you graduate from college, if you can get in when if you graduate when a president comes in, or even a couple years later, the first term or second term, there are jobs in policy, in scheduling, in advance, and strategic communications.
Okay, she's talking about college graduates, and Trump says he likes the poorly educated. Moving on.
And in targeted areas where you might have had an opportunity to graduate from. So
If you work for an agency, then you're
By the way, aren't there some MAGA characters like Charlie Kirk used to talk about college being a scam, and who else? Matt Walsh. I think Nick Fuentes too, and I've heard a lot of preachers say that college is a scam.
going to get a ton of expertise in a particular subject matter. So it could be FDA, it could be HUD, it could be housing policy, medicine, and that credential can go a long way because you'll have that expertise that other people will not. The positions, as I mentioned, are intense, and you're going to be exposed to a tremendous array of subject matters. But if you're in a particular agency, you'll be ahead of your peers when it comes to getting jobs in that industry. There is a revolving door between government and industry, for good or for ill. And if you have that government experience, you get a whole lot of credibility right off the bat.
Yeah, and I'd point to one. I'm interested to get your reaction to this. We had great success in our office, Office of Vice President, hiring for folks that had taken entry-level jobs as confidential assistants. So we hired 2 confidential assistants to the director of the Peace Corps, of all things. And so because a confidential assistant is somebody that's got that dedication, that drive, normally they've got that commitment, that excitement, and they're having to make a lot of personal sacrifices, because particularly in that particular case, they're all over the world traveling, and that's the person that's right by the side of the director, who's helping with everything from logistics to policy and everything else. That's a really good training ground. And it's also one where there's a premium on willing to sacrifice and having the kind of personality that would keep things in confidence and so forth. That's a really good training ground. And then you can go from there. You've shown that you're loyal and that you work hard and that you think on your feet and you can deal with a principal and all the people they're dealing with. So I would just put a plug in there for confidential assistance.
That's a really good point. I actually, Derek had hired someone right out of college who I had met a couple times and brought her in. And of course, she had had this big degree and everything. But she came in and it was just that. And she just grew and went to the different places that I went to and brought her along. And everything, as I said, from Xeroxing to practically going in and outside the Oval Office. And so you just never know. The key is to be open and be flexible. As we had talked about, every door often opens that you never even expect.
Yeah, that's
Sounds to me like she's talking about CIA recruiting tactics. I'm just saying.
really spot on. And hopefully you land with somebody like Aaron or Roger, who's just really fantastic to work for. Because I know, speaking for me, hiring those younger people and then helping them, mentoring them, helping them find the next job as well is just one of the most rewarding things about public service. I would just say there's no job too small serving in the administration. Go in and with both feet and you're going to find great reward.
And once you serve in one administration, you're credentialed to serve in another one, right? That's one thing. There was an 8.
Oh, yeah, that plays right into the Heritage Foundation's idea of constantly creating new plans for the next conservative administration. Okay, okay.
Year gap between Trump and the previous Republican administration, and we noticed that there was that gap in experience. So we really valued people who had the knowledge when they were there in the Bush years because they knew how the place ran. And you can't underestimate how you could position yourself not only for working in industry, but going back into government later in your career.
Yeah, really well said. And so let me turn to lessons learned, because I'm sure there's things you know now that you probably wished you knew, Aaron, back when you were in grade school and started your first administration. Or maybe in between your jobs, like going to the NSC, that's a new thing. Like were there things that you learned there? I'm sure there were. But maybe 1 or 2 lessons learned, I'll start with you, Aaron, of things you wish you knew before you started.
I think really what I learned is, as Roger said, you don't know how flexible that you actually have to be.
Yeah.
Even though you might say, oh, I can be here 18 hours a day, and oftentimes you are or more. Just the pivoting from issue to issue, it's like going from lily pad to lily pad, and you've just got to be on it. So if you can have anything thrown at you, and I think
Lily pads. That's an interesting analogy to use since they like Pepe the Frog so much.
the flexibility is something that's really important. And also energy and optimism, because some days things just fall apart at the seams and you think it's your fault, or you think the thing is always keep thinking that you're just rowing the boat with everybody else. And I think optimism is key, and that goes back to leadership in every group. You don't have to be sitting at the White House to feel like you're making an impact, because you're making an impact every place you are. You're part of an administration and part of a conservative movement.
Yeah, that's really great. And your lily pad analogy is a really good one. And another thing I think that is good going in is to really build that network of people that have a broad array of experience and knowledge that you can call on when you're there. It's like, I've been presented with this issue. Out of my comfort zone, but I bet I know 2 or 3 people I can call. Probably a lot of.
Out of your comfort zone so you can get some advice from somebody else on how to handle something you find problematic at a moral level because it's outside your comfort zone. I mean, there are plenty of times when it's perfectly appropriate to do things outside your comfort zone. It can actually help you grow. It can actually help you heal. But when you're talking about with an authoritarian administration, um, Greg Bovino, all right, he apparently was not having any problems doing what he was doing. You remember the ICE director that descended on Minneapolis? Anyway, back to this.
A lot of them work here at Heritage, wink, wink, or one of our 45 partner organizations.
That's right.
And so building that network before you go in is also critical.
And you do all along. As Roger mentioned, coming in and going out, like I personally have, and many people have. The people that I met at the beginning in the first administration, the second, the third, and the fourth, those are all people that you're going to know, even if you come from across the United States, which we really hope so many people do.
Yes.
It's not just a Washington inside the Beltway game. That's not what we're looking for. The next administration really wants people from across the United States. So even if you come for a couple of years and serve, or in the second part of an administration, everybody's welcome. And I think that's the things that you're bringing from the States is critical.
I'm going to challenge that everybody's welcome thing too. Look how Vivek Ramaswamy was greeted over at Flashpoint Media. What are you doing having a Hindu on the stage? Yeah, no. They like their useful idiots.
The network is so important. So you have to be part of the conservative movement as a known quantity to a decision maker who will be able to hire you. And that's why this project is so important. We're trying to connect as many people to give them the tools so that they will be part of that network. So when the time comes, we will know that person is a known quantity. They're good, they're eager, they're qualified. Let's bring them in to serve. Because one of the things,
A known quantity of good. Uh, what is your metric for good is where I want to start. Judging by the results of the administration you guys are behind, I'm going to guess that your concept of good is different than my concept of good.
you realize once you're in the administration is that time is your most precious commodity. You never have enough of it. You know you have 4 years and or 8 years at best, which may sound like a lot, but we had 4 years, and we were counting the days. And towards the end, it was so many things we thought, wow, if we only had more time. And that's one of the lessons is when you go in, prepare to work as fast as possible because the country's at stake, and you only
So that's why they went in to break stuff, right? Because if it's broken to where it won't work, then you can fix it in your own way, which is actually something that's included in Project 2025 is going out and cleaning house and putting in new people, loyalists, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, so on and so forth.
have a set amount of time. So use every day wisely. And once you're there, be willing to adapt to the circumstances. If I could walk through the policy process.
Yeah,
So
that'd be great.
from idea to reality. I also served on transition, where many of the it was all on the table. The world was an open vista, and it was exciting. Then once we got the ideas in the form of executive orders, the president sets the agenda, and public servants are there to execute the president's agenda, particularly political appointees. OMB and the White House Domestic Policy Council have an outsized role in coordinating and making sure the president's initiatives are advanced and the agencies implement, and there's a feedback. The agencies give their ideas back to the Domestic Policy Council, in my circumstance, and OMB. Once those ideas are fleshed out, it's usually done through policy implementation with either guidance or, more importantly, regulations. And that could be a 2-year process.
Or deregulation.
Drafting the regulations, getting the public comments in, responding to the public comments, making sure they're legally sufficient and adequate, and then you litigate them. Because if it's anything of real impact, there's going to be some divisions, and we're a very litigious society, it's going to be lawsuits. So you have to plan.
Like with East Palestine, Ohio, and the train derailment, those tanker cars full of polyvinyl chloride that didn't need to be detonated, that didn't need to be set on fire to create all that dioxin for the atmosphere, and I have no idea what other toxic chemicals were cast off. That happened because of first Trump administration deregulating um, inspections, brake inspections on railways, on freight railways. Thanks, Norfolk Southern. Uh, One of the big donors behind JD Vance, by the way.
Can you get all this done from idea to order to regulation to litigation, perhaps up to the Supreme Court, as we did with the contraceptive mandate? We actually got the regulation and idea and helped the Little Sisters of the Poor and other religious groups not violate their conscience, and the Supreme Court decided it within 4 years. We didn't get all that within 4 years, and that's one of the biggest lessons of how important you have to plan it all out from the beginning.
Yeah, Roger, that's so well said, and that's so why we're so excited about Project 2025, to try to do as much of that thinking in advance so you can hit the ground running. I wanted to talk a little bit about timing issues, because you just mentioned that it can take a really long time to get all the way through that Python of policy process. Can you talk about the importance of hitting the ground running a little bit, both the White House and also in agencies? You hear a lot about the first 100 days or so. How would you categorize that timing?
It's key.
challenge?
Every president has a honeymoon period right after the inauguration. The country's excited. It's either a new person or it's a re-election, but we just got through an election, which is already tough. The president has so much running room in those first 100 days. You have to have an administration that knows exactly how to take the reins of power, if they're changing parties in particular, and implementing right off the bat. You don't have that honeymoon period for very long, maybe 100 days.
Oh my. Well, this plan didn't play out very well, did it? I personally think this guy's looking like a doofus right now.
the American people will give you the chance to perform, and you have to execute and prove that you deserve to win that election by fulfilling the promises to the American people. So that's the most frenetic time. Also, at the end is also quite frenetic because you want to get as much as you can get in as possible, which means you have to be ready. Everything has to be done at the front end as much as possible, and that requires having the right people in there. Hopefully, people who have been there before. In my experience, it was a learning curve, and that took time. Right? And again, we had an 8-year gap before we switched parties in the White House, and it took some time to get up to speed on some things, but we were able to work hard and get it done. And next time around, we're going to be even more prepared, and I'm excited to see what's in store.
And Aaron, I want to hear from
Yeah, at the rate they're going, I don't think they're going to get another shot. Not unless they pull some really wicked shenanigans.
you in a minute, but I would just say to continue to watch and learn on these training videos. It'll really equip you, whatever agency you're going into or a White House office, to know what to expect that first day. And knowing what to expect is really half the battle or more than half the battle. And then doing that thinking in advance, which the policy proposals in Project 2025 will do. So I think we get the recipe right. Now we just have to execute on the cooking. But Aaron, what would you say about timing considerations and how important is it to get that running start for folks that are going to be going right into an agency, for example?
Absolutely. First of all, I think this Project 2025 is unprecedented. Usually it's the transition period where people start putting these things together, and to have something like this ready to roll for someone that comes in is just fantastic. So if you have the opportunity to obviously read all the policies that have already been recommendations that have been vetted, I think that's really important. On day one, the first thing you're going to be doing is going into your office and working with your manager or supervisor and your team. And I think you will already sit down and discuss what's going to happen, and you've really got to get going. And just as Roger said, you have every hour counts, and you never know after the first 100 days. Obviously, you're projecting beyond that because you have this full agenda that's been laid out, but then there's always things that could happen. I mean, if we look at President Bush, at all of this, no one knew that 9/11 was going to happen. No one knew that COVID was going to happen. I mean, there are sidewinders that come, and you just don't know, but you want to stay and make sure that you can get these things done, especially on the first 100 days. That's critical.
She brought up 9/11 and COVID, two of their favorite conspiracy theories. She's trying to say nobody knew where they came from, where that 9/11 was coming and that that COVID was going to happen. But trust me, the conspiracy theory world will strongly disagree with her.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And Aaron, you mentioned earlier about we hope the next conservative administration draws from people from all over, not just from Washington. And that's an adjustment for a lot of people who are out there. So for the person who's watching this from somewhere out in the heartland, maybe they're not even in the policy world, maybe they're a small business person or a lawyer, an accountant, a plumber, whoever it might be that's thinking about what could I add to this? What would be your advice to them?
My advice to them would be to always feel confident that if you're aligned with the president and the conservative movement, everybody is welcome because you have something to add. All skills are welcome here in Washington, and don't be afraid to come to Washington because certainly the conservative movement has a lot more respect for the people outside who bring something, and that's America, and that's federalism. And so what you can bring to Washington is going to have a whole lot of impact, so we welcome you.
Yeah, that's well.
So people from outside of DC are welcome as long as they align with the president. That's federalism, nationalism. All right.
Said, and I think even of the
And bearing in mind that the Heritage Foundation is a Christian organization. So yeah, Christian nationalism.
director of Project 2025, Paul Dance, who was a lawyer in New
That's
York City. And he was inspired by President Trump and whose administration he served. And he stepped out of that world and into the personnel world. And I think he'll tell you that he's glad that he did, and I know the president is glad that he did for the service that he rendered. And really, as you said, the experiences and the outlook that you bring from outside of Washington is so critically important to making the things work. I'll know just one note with President George W. Bush, along with all of the wonderful people he brought came fantastic Tex-Mex, which we really had a dearth of here. But just culturally, this town changes with
That's
new
exactly
administrations. And so come here, breathe some new air, some new life into this capital city. I think is just so important and so healthy. Roger, anything you'd add on folks who they're in a different career track? Is it possible to pause and to go in and serve in government service?
I'm going to interject here before this guy answers this question. When they're talking about Midwesterners, aligned with the president and being able to make a difference. I think I've told this story a couple of times, but as I was making my final breaks from MAGA people, uh, I was moving to St. Louis and I got involved with a legislative action group. And this MAGA dude's like, "Hey man, do me a favor. See what you can do about getting some legislation to make dueling legal again." And I'm just like, dude, that's not gonna fly. That's just not gonna fly. But he's all in on Trump, so somebody like that with a GED, I mean, they obviously prefer a college education, but again, Trump likes the poorly educated.
And what advice would you have?
Yeah, if you have a mindset of being a change agent, that is incredibly attractive for people who are hiring in political positions. You have to be willing to say, I'm going to, take my high-paying job and put it on pause, or maybe I'm going to delay some other life goal I had in order to serve at this moment now to make a difference. And there's so many obstacles. You could have recalcitrant career employees in an agency that are trying to impede the president's priorities if they disagree. You could have infighting among political appointees as well. So you have to have a thick skin, but you have to have that guiding star of, I want to come serve to help the country and implement the president's policies. And if you have that drive, you're going to be okay. And one other thing I would add on the personnel side.
How many panel members or cabinet members? How many administration members has Trump fired so far? Asking for a friend.
I saw good people who had that sort of drive taken out of consideration because they said some irresponsible things on social media. And that's a very important thing to be aware of, that you will be vetted on your history of social media use for the good and the bad. If you've shown courage and grit and stood up for the right conservative principles, that will be a plus factor. If you've done it in a way that is reckless, that may be a negative factor. So be
It sounds like to me they would appreciate meme warriors.
very sensitive to what you do in social media.
That's a really good tip. And I'd say, too, that President Reagan had a sign on his desk that really everybody should have when they're serving in administration, which is there is no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And I think that's so true, that when you're having success, spreading around the accolades is really, really important. Just remember, it's not
And that's how the Heritage Foundation got 60% of their agenda accomplished through Reagan.
about you, it's about the president and the country ultimately. And I think that's one of the things I think we should end on is you both are now here full-time at the Heritage Foundation. Your work is to try to help save this country. Our president likes to remind all of us that there really is kind of a narrow window here we have to turn things around. So can you speak, maybe Roger, I'll start with you. Can you speak to the urgency of this moment and why, even if it's hard for people to understand how this might fit in their career, why it's just so important that people do step forward and serve at this time?
In short, the country is at stake. The winds of cultural change have been going in the progressive liberal side for decades, and the only way to stop it is getting back the reins of power at the federal government. The liberal behemoth has used the federal government to pursue its aims with a vengeance, and that's where the main fight is.
And the Republicans haven't.
And we need folks of great, solid conservative principles, of integrity, to step up and serve to take the country back.
Yeah, well said. Aaron, anything you'd add to that?
Just on the international side, I think it's from national security side, we've never had a greater threat than we do now, which is China. And I think that we need to recognize that. I had an opportunity to live there with the last firm that I was with. And I think it's very clear ideologically what our differences are, and it just integrates. It's not foreign policy versus domestic policy. It's all one now. And I think that we need to see what's happened here in the United States and is
Oh, that's an interesting take. There's not foreign policy and domestic policy. They're all one and the same. That that explains to me why I'm seeing global war on terrorism tactics used against Americans.
as Roger said, move forward on a conservative track, because it's very clear what the next steps have to be.
Well said, and I think I just end by saying, if you are a person of good character, solid conservative, if you decide you can't join this project, then think about there's someone else that is going to do that. We'd rather it be you. Thank you for watching this session. We hope you'll watch all the sessions to be as prepared as possible if the American people do give us a conservative president. Thanks very much for listening.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, we made it through that one. Only 14 more to go. Um, so if you're a good moral character like Donald Trump, right? Or Pete Hegseth, Matt Gates, um, Madison Cawthorn. Um, do I really need to keep going down the list? Well, let's go ahead and do um, Stuart Rhodes. Yeah, let's go ahead and name him. Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, um, uh, Dan Bovino, or Bongino, sorry, Dan Bongino, Cash Patel, Vivek Ramaswamy, um, Dinesh D'Souza. All right. I'll stop. I'll stop. I'll stop. All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed that video. That was a trip actually, but it answered a lot of questions for me, plain and simple. I hope it answered some questions for you. And I hope as we work through these that some folks can get some ideas on a clearer view of what we're up against and maybe how we can better counter it. And maybe we can figure out their tactics a little easier and nip them in the bud way earlier. I don't know. I don't know. But if you made it to the end, I appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, do me a favor and do that. It's great for the algorithm. Also, if you enjoyed the video, a thumbs up would be great. Share this with somebody you think it might help. There's 24 of these videos. There's all these different categories. There's something for everyone. Anyway, until the next video, please take care of yourself so you can help take care of others. Get the rest you need. Keep track of those fluids. And please remember, mental health matters.
Everybody wants to